Welcome back to the latest episode of Mystery Unsolved. I am, of course, your host, Justin Bienvenu, and for the first time in a long time, I am streaming on Instagram as well as Facebook and YouTube. So, going to try to do my best. I might just look down at my notes and read, but nevertheless, let's get started. Welcome to the latest season, the newest season of Mystery Unsolved. Two new things for this season. First of all, like I said, I am streaming live on Instagram as well. And also, for the first, at least, I want to say several episodes, I will not be using my phone because I'm streaming on Instagram. What I will be doing, however, is reading from two books. This is where I get some of the cases, a lot of the cases, because I've recently read two books and they're mysteries and they were so good that I decided to read from them so I could have a case on them. Tonight's episode, the Villasca Axe Murders. Has anyone heard of those? If you haven't, you are in for quite a treat. Without further ado, Mystery Unsolved, the Villasca Axe Murders. The first book I will be reading from is a book called Unsolved Murders. Actually, no, it's not. I knew I would mess this up. Excuse me a moment. It would not be Mystery Unsolved without me being the least bit unprofessional. I will be reading from BuzzFeed Unsolved, Supernatural, 101 True Tales of Hauntings, Demons, and the Paranormal. I may or may not discuss where I read the books from now on, but at least I'm giving you a heads up now. The first, I'm going to read from this book. This one, it's a one page, it's like a page and a half long. So we're getting a very brief idea of what the murder's about, what the case is about. The one I just showed, the one I showed you the first time, that one goes in depth. That one's very thorough, to the point where we might be here longer than a half an hour, just because I'm going to stop and I'm going to read it. Now, mind you, I already read this. However, it's been a few months, so I probably will stop and be just as shocked as you are upon coming across crazy information. Without further ado, Mystery Unsolved, the Villasca Axe Murders. On June 10th, 1912, the morning after the Children's Day service at the local Presbyterian church, Mary Peckham noticed that the nearby Moore home seemed strangely quiet. Usually the family of six, Sarah and Josiah and their kids, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, would be out bright and early. The elderly neighbor called Joe's brother, who arrived to discover a gruesome scene. So yeah, 1912. The one thing to also note about the first couple of episodes of this series this season, they take place in the turn of the decade. So we're talking early 1900s. There ain't no time frame for murder, whether it's now or back then. Later, it would be determined that at around midnight, someone had taken Joe's axe from the yard, entered the house, and bludgeoned each family member, plus Lena and Ina Stillinger, two girls who were sleeping over that night. One thing I can say is that there's a little more information on the two girls who were friends of one of the girls that stayed over. The killer then left the axe leaning against the wall next to a 4-pound slab of bacon, covered the mirrors and glass in the entranceway with clothing taken from the family's dressers, and left a plate of uneaten food and a basin of bloody water on the kitchen table. Let me read that again. I kind of slurred my words. Again, I read too fast and my brain processes. The killer then left the axe leaning against the wall next to a 4-pound slab of bacon. I mean, if you're going to leave an axe next to anything, why not a 4-pound slab of bacon, right? Covered the mirrors and glass in the entryway with clothing taken from the family's dressers, and left a plate of uneaten food and a basin of bloody water on the kitchen table. This dude is so crazy. He ate He ate food after he murdered the family. Or maybe before. I would imagine it was after, though. But either way, that's really messed up. The crime was never solved despite an abundance of suspects. Was it the state senator Frank Jones who sought revenge after Joe Moore left his employ to open his own independent company? Was it William Mansfield, hired as a hitman by State Senator Jones? What about Reverend Lynn George, Jacqueline Kelly, who told the police God told him to suffer the children to come unto me, but then later recanted his confession? So again, I said this is very brief. I don't know why this is very brief. I mean, these two usually get into some good cases. This is where I get a lot of my cases was from the BuzzFeed Unsolved guys. And there we go. Or Transient Andy Sawyer, Bloodstained Joe Ricks, Prisoner George Myers. Then there's Reverend J.J. Burris, who received the deathbed confession of the killer. Too bad he couldn't remember the man's name. Of the bunch, Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims, seemed the most promising. He was convicted of the axe murder of his mother and grandmother months after the Villasca killings. Interesting. I mean, obviously, we know why he's the number one suspect. He used an axe before, used an axe again. And he just so happened to have been working on the railroad during the 2-year slew of more than 24 similar murders across the Midwest. Over the decades, the house changed hands until Martha and Darwin Lynn purchased and set about restoring it in 1994. Now you can visit the cemetery where the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters are laid to rest, or stop by the house and even spend the night. Visitors report the doors open and close on their own. Lamps spontaneously fall. Ladders move. Flashlights turn on and off. Many claim to have experienced the sensation of being watched. Some have heard the laughter of children. So as you can see, I could have actually used this as a mystery ghost stories segment as well. But because it's an unsolved murder, it's on Mystery Unsolved. Now we're going to get into the very detailed one. And yeah, my memory's a little hazy, which is probably good because, like I said, I'm going to be just as surprised as you guys are. But it's a lot more detailed. So all the suspects that you heard me rattle off, some of them, there's a little more information on them. So it was a quiet Monday morning on June 10th, 1912, in the farming town of Villasca, Iowa. A woman named Mary Peckham was bustling about doing her chores when she noticed an odd stillness at about 7 a.m. See, it's a little more, yeah. Normally by this time, Mary's neighbors would be bustling too. Instead, aside from the impatient mooings of cows waiting to be milked in the field, the house was silent. So just like the first one, like I said, Mary knows she knows her neighbors. She knows that out of the 6 people, that house is usually loud, maybe rowdy. I don't know if people were rowdy in the tens, in the 1910s. But yeah, she's come to expect stuff. The house next door belonged to the popular and prosperous Moore family. Parents Josiah B., a businessman known as either Joe JB or Joe. Okay, so his name was so that's why he's known as Joe. And Sarah. And their 4 children, 11-year-old Herman, 9-year-old Catherine, 7-year-old Boyd, and 5-year-old Paul. You know what they were doing? Jeez, huh? With that many kids, the home was really quiet. As to be expected. Worried, Mary called JB's brother Ross, who used his key to get inside. He saw blood and asked her to fetch the town marshal. Marshal Henry Hank Horton, does he hear a who? Was similarly shaken after walking through the silent home. Somebody murdered in every bed. He muttered as he went to fetch Dr. J. Clark Cooper, the first physician to examine the scene. Inside the house, the entire Moore family had been brutally slain, as were the two young friends of the family, Lena and Ina Stillinger. The killer used an axe, using the blade to kill his victims, and then the handle to bludgeon their faces beyond recognition before covering their heads with bedcloths. Dear God, I forgot about that part. As if it weren't bad enough that he killed them with the blade of the axe, he used the handle afterwards. The mutilation was so severe that one Iowa newspaper misidentified the Stillinger girls as another pair altogether. Jeez, can you imagine? Oh my God, that is horrible. The young guests were in a downstairs bedroom, while the rest of the family was upstairs. Investigators determined that Lena and Ina were the first victims, and that one of them had awakened, judging by a defensive wound that suggested she'd thrown up an arm to ward off a blow. I always think it's fascinating how doctors or like people that examine scenes can determine, like, oh, she was in a defensive stance. Like how like that's crazy. Like even if her hand was down, you could tell like, oh, based off the stuff on the bruise and the cut on her arm, she was in a defensive position. Like that's crazy that you could even determine it back then. It's possible that Sarah had also awakened during the attack. One neighbor told the police she thought she heard Sarah's voice in the night yelling, oh dear, don't. The Adams County Free Press reported all the bodies were found in a natural sleeping posture, with their heads beaten almost to a pulp. Jesus. It is gruesome. I probably should have stated this before the episode, but viewer discretion is advised. I'm probably going to put that in the beginning of the video when I put in the description on YouTube. Yeah. It appeared the killer had taken pains to conceal himself. The blinds had been tightly drawn close to the windows. Glass doors had been covered with articles of clothing. Even the mirrors inside the house had been shrouded. The attack was not a robbery, as no valuables were taken or even disturbed. No, there was one agenda here: cold-blooded murder. It seemed that the killer wasn't in a rush. Police discovered 2 cigarette butts in the attic, implying that the killer, or killers, could have waited until the family was asleep before attacking them. In addition, the murderer had taken time to partially clean the murder weapon before leaving it propped against the wall of the downstairs bedroom. Don't forget, next to 4 slabs of bacon. The crime scene had some odd elements that perplexed researchers even today. A slab of bacon was left leaning against the wall next to the axe, while another piece of bacon was found on the piano in the parlor. On the kitchen table was a plate of uneaten food in a bowl of bloody water. It's perhaps noteworthy, too, that Lena's nightgown had been pushed up, leaving her exposed, although doctors determined that she had not been sexually assaulted. The police made a cruel error in failing to immediately secure the crime scene. Oh, wait till you hear this. The police made a crucial error in failing to immediately secure the crime scene, allowing dozens of people to trample through the murder house. This is going to come up in another episode, and I'm not going to tell you which one, but it's a famous case. And it's one of the reasons that makes me just hold my head in absolute, like, what the fuck moment, because it's in a what the fuck moment, because it is just how do you not secure a crime scene like that? Like that is just baffling. One suspect even had a portion of skull in his possession that he bragged to several witnesses belonged to JB. However, he was able to plausibly explain that he had simply picked up a piece of bone off the floor while viewing the crime scene. Yeah, because, yeah, yeah. The investigators' best guess was that the killer must have been a relative of the family, and early reports tossed out some names. Samuel Moyer, he was not in that first book. A brother-in-law of JB. John Van Gilder, also not in the first book. A former brother-in-law of Sarah. Moyer was in fact arrested but later discounted because he had an alibi. Groups of local people also searched barns and outbuildings hoping to catch the killer. May Van Gilder, JB, and Sarah's 16-year-old niece said the Saturday before the murder, a stranger had asked her where the Moores lived. When the girl later told Sarah of the inquiry, Sarah reportedly replied that someone matching the stranger's description had been hanging around the Moore home. That exchange prompted the police to arrest a man in blood-stained shoes named Joe Ricks. That one was in there, in Monmouth, Illinois. When they traveled to identify him, she said they had the wrong man. A character named C.M. Brown, that was not in the first book, then reached out to detectives and offered to obtain an image of the killer from the retina of Lena. The theory was that, listen to this. I've never heard this in my entire life. Ever. This is from 1912. Just remember that. What I'm about to read is from 1912. So you can take this as either really serious, like, oh my God, or like, what the fuck? Like, why would they even think of something like that? That's retarded. I'll leave it up to you to figure out. The theory was that because Lena had awoken, the last sight she saw was the killer, and that image would be imprinted on her retina, much like a photograph, known as optography. This was thought to be a serious possibility at the beginning of the 19th century. Have you ever heard of that? Optography. So because the last thing she saw was the killer, that they could somehow get that photo, that image, in her eye. Apparently that's a thing. Or it was a thing. Detectives agreed, and Brown said he recovered an image that indicates a man of stout build, very broad shoulders, and extraordinary length between the shoulders and hips. Unsurprisingly, this avenue proved another dead end. Crazy, right? Crazy. Cora McCoy, who lived 2 blocks from the Moore house, said she saw two strangers walk about at 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, the day of the murders. The men walked close together as if talking confidentially. McCoy said she saw them again at dusk. One of them looked like a man named William Blackie Mansfield. He was in the first book. A supposed army deserter and cocaine fiend who 2 years after the Villasca murders was a suspect in a similar axe slaying of his wife, daughter, father-in-law, and mother-in-law. The first book said he only killed his wife and his mother. So the BuzzFeed Unsolved guys didn't do their due diligence. Another neighbor of the Moore family, Mary Landers. All these I love how like all these neighbors, like as a matter of fact, I did see something like totally normal, right? Like, is that what people in the olden days did? They looked out their windows and saw strange shit. You know what I mean? Like we all have that nosy neighbor. I don't think this falls under nosy neighbor. This just falls under, oh, what a coincidence. You're looking out your window and saw a strange man. Of course you did. Mary Landers also saw two strangers walking toward their home. She said they paused to look at Moore's axe. Really? Which was in a chopping block in the yard. Several witnesses said they also spotted an Iowa senator Frank F. Jones. Frank Jones. He was in the first book. And his son Albert in town at the time of the murders. On the surface, this might seem harmless, but JB had worked for the elder Jones farming equipment company before leaving to start a competing business, sorry. Jones was reportedly upset by his departure and by his nabbing of a lucrative John Deere contract. Ooh, I get to use those nice shiny green and yellow trucks and you do not. That's a reason to murder someone, right? There were also rumors that JB was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, Donna. See, this, I told you, this one's way more thorough. So, there's motive right there. You get to use John Deere tractors and I don't, and I think you're sleeping with my daughter-in-law. Boom. Sounds good enough to me, but we still have like 3 pages here, so. It all made for bad blood, but was it enough to kill? Local men Fred Freyer, Frank Millhiller, and Vern Robinson reported seeing JB talking with Senator Jones' son a few hours before the murders. I'm trying to pinpoint when the murder supposedly happened, because in the morning, Mary Peckham, the neighbor, did it say? I don't think it said when the murders were, so it must have been at night. Another man, Jim Bridewell, said he saw Albert Jones with Villasca pool hall owner W.B. Burt McCall. These names, my God. All these initials. Garage owner E.M. Nelson. C.M., W.B., J.B., E.M. Don't keep track because I'm not. Said he spotted McCall behaving suspiciously and in a rush about 9 p.m. on the night of the slayings. Okay, so 9 o'clock. So it must have been late at night. These witnesses' statements led to theories that Senator Jones, Albert Jones, Blackie Mansfield, and Burt McCall had worked together. Okay. A detective, we don't really need to know his name, it's James Wilkerson if you care, who worked for the renowned Burns Detective Agency, was hired to investigate the killings after police came up empty-handed. Of course they did. In 1916, he announced he had solved it, stating that Senator Jones had hired Mansfield to murder JB for hurting his business. The theory was bolstered by testimony from Alice Willard, a local woman recruited by Wilkerson to help investigate the case. Willard said that on the night of the murder, she and 2 other women had driven home from Lincoln, Nebraska, when their car broke down near the Moore house. How convenient. As she reached the back corner of the Moore lot, she saw 5 men talking in hushed voices. While she couldn't hear that much of their conversation, she said she picked up some key words and phrases, such as money, Sunday, after church, and get Joe first, the rest will be easy. She recognized one of the men as Senator Jones. Okay, this is like... The police find nothing. Detectives naturally will be like a little better at getting details, but this seems like very intricate details to the point where it's like, did it really have, like why would you make that up? But at the same time, who knows? Some investigators questioned why Alice Willard had waited 4 years to share this evidence. She claimed that she had been too afraid to come forward earlier. I mean, sure, why not? Wilkerson's claim to have cracked the case was heralded with huge headlines. Great crime at Villasca is now solved. Read 1 from Marshalltown, Iowa. The story reported that Mansfield had not only been hired to kill J.B. Moore, but was also responsible for the double axe murder 4 days prior in Paola, Kansas, of Roland Hudson and his wife Anna, who were also murdered while they slept. The allegations against Mansfield were brought before a grand jury. but Mansfield's employer provided records showing that he had been in Illinois at the time of the murders. Mansfield was never charged and later successfully sued the Burns Detective Agency and Wilkerson for $2,250. Do you have any idea how much money that would be now? If someone accused you of murder and there wasn't enough evidence to say you did it, and the person that was accused could then turn around and sue you, it would be for millions. It doesn't say that, but I know for it would be millions. So the fact that he only got $2,250 for being wrongfully accused of murder is laughable. As for Senator Jones, his career was ruined by the allegations. I would imagine so. In an unsuccessful attempt to sue Wilkerson for slander. Despite no charges being brought against Jones and Mansfield, Ross Moore, JB's brother, and Joe Stillinger, Rena and Ina's father, continued to believe Wilkerson's theory. Neither the Villasca nor the Paola killings were the only axe murders of the era. There was a string of similar killings throughout the Midwest, many of which were ascribed to Henry Lee Moore, who was in the first book. No relation to the Moores of Villasca. Moore was found guilty of murdering his mother and grandmother in December of 1912. Oh, I got him mixed up with the other person, my bad. In the U.S. Department of Justice agent M.W. McClogry theorized that he could be responsible for as many as 23 more, including the Villasca deaths. I'm trying to wrap this up here. All right, we're almost done. We're almost there. A quarter way home. McLaury pointed to the similarities beyond the murder weapon. Each victim was slain in their homes with exceptional brutality. In each case, a bloody axe was found nearby. He also noted that the axe murders started in late April 1911 and stopped mid-December 1912, a window of time during which Henry Moore was out of prison. In their book, The Man from the Train, Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James claim that Paul Mueller, a German immigrant farmhand, was a serial killer who traveled by train and killed families with their own axes. The Villasca slaying is one of many killings that pinned on this elusive character. Some townspeople said that they had spotted Mueller shortly before midnight on the night of the murders, and he seemed to be in a rush. After the bodies were discovered, a nationwide manhunt ensued, with Mueller reportedly holding up in Wisconsin, New York, Pennsylvania, and beyond. He was never found. One thing that this book will do is it will give you a shit ton of suspects, which I don't particularly like, because because the first suspect I read, personally, I'm like, oh yeah, it's gonna be him. And then they give me another one, I'm like, ooh, it's him. And then they give me like 5 more, and I'm just like, dear God, like, how they can't all have done it. That's the one downfall of this book. They either give you a ton of suspects or none at all. There was a happy medium somewhere. One suspect was actually tried for the Villasca deaths. The morning the bodies were found, a reverend by the name of Lynn George Kelly, who was in the second book, left Villasca by train at about 5:20 a.m. On the train, long before the bodies had been discovered, he had allegedly told fellow travelers that there were 8 dead souls back in town who had been butchered in their beds. Did he really say that, though? Did he, though? Did he? Word of this prompted investigators to take a closer look at Kelly, who had arrived in town the morning of the murders and even attended the Children's Day in which the youngsters had performed. Kelly had allegedly mailed a bundle of blood-soaked clothing to a laundry... Hold on. Kelly allegedly mailed a bundle of blood-soaked clothing to a laundry soon after the murders. 2 weeks later, he returned to Villasca, posing as a detective, joined a tour of the murder house. He inserted himself further into the case by claiming that at about 1 a.m., he had actually heard the thud of the axe that killed the 8 victims. This guy seems like a nut. I don't know. There's too much good juicy details in this. I just don't buy it. I just don't buy. I don't think it was Kelly. I don't. Oh, here we go. I just said he was crazy. Kelly had a history of mental illness and related odd behavior. No shit. He was a schizophrenic. There was no doubt about that, said Ed Epperly, a PhD at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, who studied the case for nearly 40 years. I think the I think the motive was sexual. Epperly points to the uplifted nightgown of one of the victims and draws a parallel between that and Kelly's habit of window peeking. Kelly had also been charged twice with sending obscene materials in the mail. Okay, it just gets more sexual and it's kind of it. It's not worth reading. Um, I don't agree with that because they were brutally murdered, and there was only one instance where the girl's nightgown was up. But even then, both books in the beginning said there's probably nothing here because it wasn't with the other victims. So that doesn't really add up. And it gets into more about Kelly, but I've heard enough about him. Public opinion in Villisca was divided. Some residents thought that Senator Jones was the culprit, while others were convinced Kelly was the killer. It really tore the community apart, said filmmaker Kelly Rundle, who made a 2004 movie about the murders called Villisca, Living with a Mystery. The case has also acquired a supernatural aura. The Villisca house has been investigated by numerous ghost hunters who claim to have encountered paranormal phenomena, helping to make the building a tourist attraction. Visitors can even stay there overnight. No, thank you. Would any of you people stay at the Villisca murder house? I wouldn't. While modern forensic science would probably have solved the Villisca case, in 1912 even fingerprinting was still new, and law enforcement cooperation across state lines was poor. The result? The case has remained unsolved for over a century. Fingerprinting was in its infancy, but you know what wasn't? Optography. Look that shit up. If you're just tuning in. So yeah, wasn't that a doozy? Ton of suspects. Family just completely mutilated to the point where I said this in the beginning, viewer discretion is advised. Not only did he use the blade of the axe to kill all members of the family, but he then turned the axe around and used the handle to make sure that none of the people could be identified. To the point where one of the doctors misidentified the two girls that were sleeping over. So now it's my theories here. Okay. There's quite a lot there, but there is 2 or 3 people in particular that I'm going to put my money on. First of all, George Kelly, not on my list. I don't think he did it. He was diagnosed as a schizophrenic, which means he was batshit crazy. And if you're that crazy, like I understand people who are unstable, obviously they're going to kill. But there's just, I don't know. I feel like 3 different people gave 3 different ways and reasons as to why he killed. Whereas, like, if he's a schizo, that would be good enough to say he did it. Oh, it was sexually motivated by him. I don't see it. So it's not him. Senator Jones, to me, is a good one. I would say my money's on Senator Jones because, number one, J.B. Moore left for a competitive company. He also got to use those nice, shiny green and yellow John Deere tractors. Also, he was supposedly having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, Donna? What's her name? Donna. Donna. So I think he's probably the main suspect. And then William Blackie Mansfield, I think he might have had something to do with it. Maybe there was 2 people. Maybe Jones either hired somebody to do it, which would be Mansfield. Although Mansfield was clear, but I still don't see that either. And then, of course, there's a bunch of other people, but my money's on Jones because let's Let's be honest here. He's a senator. Senators have money. He can easily hire somebody to take someone out. Although my big issue here, I guess, would be if he had beef with JB, why not just kill JB? You know what I mean? Like, why kill the entire family? Even the two girls that were sleeping over, the two friends. Like, that seems a bit excessive. Like, maybe Jones said, oh, I only want you to get JB. But then the person took it upon themselves to be like, well, shit, if I'm going to just kill him, what if somebody else overhears and just kills all of them? Like a complete psychopath. These are the theories. And then, oh, that's right. Paul Mueller's an interesting one. That's the German guy that the some of the townspeople said that they had saw. He traveled by train and killed families with their own axes. He was an elusive character. He has some traits that sound fairly plausible, but my issue is, like, he killed the families with their own axes, assuming that the family had an axe for him to kill with. And also, what was his motive? A non-axe wielding, hobo train driving murderer? Like, plus he was never found, so it's like they just kind of threw that one to the wall and said, does this stick? Not really? Okay, let's move on. My money is on Senator Jones. Whether he did it himself, which I highly doubt he did, he hired somebody, William Mansfield, or others, or someone else, to do it. The crazy part about this, it happened in 1912, and it still remains unsolved today. That's over 100 years old. Absolutely crazy. And again, if there were modern technology, this probably would have been solved. But unfortunately, it probably never will be. I hope you enjoyed the latest episode of Mystery Unsolved, the Villasca Axe Murders. For those watching on Instagram, that's new this season, hope you enjoyed. And do stay tuned next week for the latest episode. I would check, but I'm streaming live, so you'll just have to tune in next week to find out. This has been Mystery Unsolved, the Villasca Axe Murders. Have a good night.